Hello, I'm John Stouffer, and this is a video tutorial covering some of the challenges and solutions I came across while creating my latest title, Prime Directive, a Metroid-inspired adventure title. So, for today we are going to be looking at pillars. One of the things I thought would be fun to throw in my game would be to have destructible columns of rocks that the player can destroy at strategic points to create interesting solutions to various exploration problems. So the first easy thought I had was, well, that's simple enough. Just make a pillar of rocks and space them out correctly and make them all have rigid bodies. But as you can see, doing so doesn't really give the player much control. It looks nice, but at the end of the day, everything just sort of collapses and doesn't act very useful. So the next simple thought I had was, that's easy enough, just give them all rigid bodies. And now, boom, you have a nice precision shot. The pillar stays intact, and the player can use it to manipulate their way through the environment. Until I realized there's another problem. If you shoot and create a gap, now you just have a floating column of pillar, so that's not going to work either. So finally I settled down and said, okay, I'm going to have to take this seriously and create a programming solution. And eventually I came up with a solution where you can do this, and then you can shoot above, and then the middle pieces fall on their own, giving the player the control I wanted while still having the pillar act naturally. So let's take a look at how this was achieved, and that'll be that. Alright everyone, let's take a look at what is going on here. So we have ourselves a pillar of rock, and it has a series of cubes running up and down it. And if we go and look in the inspector tab, we can see a lot of the standard things you'd expect, like a rigid body attached to these. They're set to gravity and kinematic at this point. These two scripts about enemy info and description, they're only relevant to my game. They can be ignored. The only script that really matters here is this one, Ice Chunk Check, which the title came from when I was working in my kind of ice snow area of my title. Obviously, you can call it whatever you want. But let's take a look at what's going on in this script. So here we have the script here. And we'll kind of talk through it, and we'll probably have to kind of go back and forth to see what's really going on. We start off with these two game objects, public game object ice above and public game object ice below. And then we have two booleans, above and below, which initially are set to true. Ice chunk check 2. So as you recall, that's just the name of the script. So it's checking for these scripts on other components, and that's where I think it's probably good that we bring up this and we kind of take a look at exactly what is going on here. So when it says ICC and ICC2, Ice Chunk Check 1 and 2, we're looking at the above get component and then the ice below get component. So when we look on here, we have cube 7 here, right? If we look, cube 6 is the cube below it, cube 8 is the cube above it. So when we look, we have assigned above cube 8 and below is cube 6. So cube 7 is, below is a 6, above it is 8. So that is what was assigned for here in the inspector. So we're literally going in and trying to grab the ICC component out of the cube directly above and below the particular cube in the pillar. So then we can go in here, and I'm using a quarantine timer just because based on what I've been reading, that can save you a little bit on performance, which matters to me. But if you don't really concern yourself too much about that and you just want things to act very immediately, you can just use an update function here just as easily. But that's what I'm doing here. So you can see it starts Corleone, delay, waits a tenth of a second, and then here at the bottom you see it just restarts the quarantine again. Oops, and I misread that. Let's fix it. Alright, anyways, so let's see what's actually happening every time it cycles through and does this delay check. So first it goes in and wants to see if ice above equals null. So if you're ice 7, remember ice for cube 7, cube 8 is the one above it. So we want to go and see, does cube 8 still exist? And if it does not exist, then set above to false, meaning, okay, for cube 7, there's no longer anything above it, so it knows it no longer has any support above. Then let's say cube 8 still exists, it goes and it checks the ICC for above. It says, okay, you still exist, but does something exist above you? And that's where ICC sees if, for the cube above it, whether that has been set to false. And if that has been set, so if this Boolean right here was set to false in the cube above it, then it sets its own above Boolean to false as well, saying, okay, the guy above me still exists, but somewhere up the line above me, the player made some kind of hole, so we no longer have support above us at some point. And then, as you can imagine, with the ice below, we're doing the exact same thing, but in reverse. So we check to see if the ice chunk below us, which would be ice chunk 6 in this case, whether it still exists, and if it does not, set it to null, and if it does still exist, well, that doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. Let's check to see if its Boolean below has been set to false. And if it has, then that means we know somewhere along this pillar, somewhere below us, the player has created a hole, so we no longer have below support. Then it simply goes through this final check, and it says, if both above have been set to false and below have been set to false, then that means set your rigid body kinematic to false. So you're no longer kinematic, so you'll fall with gravity, and that's it. And then it falls naturally, and it looks wonderful. So as you can see, when we go into the inspector tab over here, you can see that all I've really done is gone through the entire pillar, and I've assigned to each cube the cube that exists directly above and below it in this inspector, and then I've preset all the check marks to true, because right now the pillar is obviously intact. Now, an interesting thing you can do with this script is you could easily, let's say, if I got rid of this kind of rock chunk here above and these upper supports, then the pillar would no longer have support above. It would start by just going straight into the air, in which case the solution would simply be to grab all of them and preset above to false. So then all the player would have to do is destroy one of the belows, and everything above would come tumbling down. Similarly, if you wanted to have a dangling pillar, you could preset everything for above to true and everything to false for below. And then your dangling pillar will, of course,
anyways, I hope this was helpful to anyone out there hoping to make some kind of destructible pillars within their game. Or at the very least, I hope this was interesting and insightful as you kind of saw how I worked my way through this problem. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below, and thanks again for watching. Bye.